to another tutorial specifically dedicated to arrays. In this video we will look at 6 small projects so your understanding of array gets better. So let's get started with our first project, which is how to find the largest number in an array. First, let's define our array of numbers. For this example, we will use the following array: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next, we need to create a function that will take in this array and return the largest number. Let's call this function largest number. Inside the function, we will create a variable called largest and set it equal to the first element in the array. This will be our starting point for comparison. Now, we will use a for loop to iterate through the rest of the elements in the array. For each iteration, we will check if the current element is larger than the largest variable. If it is, we will update the value of largest to be the current element. Finally, after the loop is completed, we can return the value of largest as the result of our function. Let's test our function by logging the result to the console. We should see the output 5, which is the largest number in our array. And that's it. You now know how to find the largest number in an array using a simple function and a for loop. Now let's take a look at our next project, which is a function for an array of strings and returns the longest string in the array. First, let's define our array of strings. Next, we need to create a function that will take in this array and return the longest string. Let's call this function longest string. Inside the function, we will create a variable called longest and set it equal to the first element in the array. This will be our starting point for comparison. Now, we will use a for loop to iterate through the rest of the elements in the array. For each iteration, we will check the length of the current element. If it is longer than the longest variable, we will update the value of longest to be the current element. Finally, after the loop is completed, we can return the value of longest as the result of our function. Let's test our function by logging the result to the console. We should see the output London, which is the longest string in our array. Next in line is finding even numbers in array and return them using function. Let's define our array of numbers first. For this example, we will use the following array: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Next, we need to create a function that will take in this array and return an array of the even numbers. Let's call this function findEven. Inside the function, we will create a new array called even to store our even numbers. Now, we will use a for loop to iterate through the elements in the array. For each iteration, we will use the modulus operator to check if the current element is even. If it is, we will add it to our even array using the push method. Finally, after the loop is completed, we can return the even array as the result of our function. Let's test our function by logging the result to the console. We should see the output 2, 4, 6, which are the even numbers in our array. And here we are done. Takes an array of strings and returns the number of strings that are palindromes. Similar to other example, first, let's define our array of strings. For this example, we will use the following array: rayscar, level, hello, world, radar. Next, we need to create a function that will take in this array and return the number of palindromes. Let's call this function count palindromes. Inside the function, we will create a variable called count and set it equal to 0. This will be used to keep track of the number of palindromes we find. Now, we will use a for loop to iterate through the elements in the array. For each iteration, we will check if the current string is a palindrome. To do this, we will create a new variable called isPalindrome and set it equal to true. We will then use another for loop to iterate through the characters in the current string. For each character, we will compare it to its corresponding character on the other side of the string. If any of these pairs do not match, we will set his palindrome to false and break out of the loop. If his palindrome is still true after the inner loop has completed, it means that the current string is a palindrome. In this case, we will increment the count variable by 1. Finally, after the outer loop has completed, we can return the count variable as the result of our function. Let's test our function by logging the result to the console. We should see the output 3, which is the number of palindromes in our array. Next, let's take an array of objects and returns an array of the values of a specified property in each object. Over here, we start by declaring a function called getPropertyValue that takes in 2 arguments, an array of objects and a string representing the name of the property we want to extract. Inside the function, we create a new empty array called values that will store the values of the specified property from each object. Next, we start a for loop that will iterate through each object in the array. The loop declares a variable called currentObject that will store the current object being processed. Inside the loop, we use the hasOwnProperty method to check if the current object has a property with the name specified in the property's argument. If the current object has the specified property, we use the square bracket notation to access the value of that property and push it onto the values array using the push method. After the loop finishes executing, we return the values array. In this section, we're going to learn how to filter an array of objects by their type. To do this, we'll define a function called getObjectsOfType that takes in 2 arguments, an array of objects and a constructor function that represents the type of objects we want to filter. The function will loop through each object in the array and check if the object is an instance of the specified type using the instanceIf operator. If it is, the object will be added to a new array called ObjectsOfType. Finally, the function will return the ObjectsOfType array. Now let's see how to use this function. First, we define a class called Animal with a single name property. Then, we define 2 subclasses called Cat and Dog that inherit from the Animal class. Next, we create an array called Animals that contains several instances of the Cat and Dog classes. Then we call the getObjectsOfType function with the Animals array and the Cat constructor function, and store the returned array in a variable called Cats. Finally, we log the Cats array to the console using the console.log function. We can also use the getObjectsOfType function to filter the Animals array by the Dog type in the same way. And that's it. We now have 2 arrays, one containing only the cat objects from the Animals array, and another containing only the dog objects. Below the function, we call the getPropertyValue function with the objects array and the string name, and store the returned array in a variable called names. Finally, we log the names array to the console using the console.log function. And that's it. The code defines a function that extracts the values of a specific property from an array of objects, and then uses the function to extract the name property values from the objects array. I hope you get a little more idea now about how the array work in different conditions. If you like this video, then please do hit the subscribe button and do not forget to share. Thanks for watching.